The crack of a hand hitting a face is a sound you never forget. I was standing maybe 10 feet away, holding 2 glasses of cider, when I saw my wife Lorraine stumble backward. Her glasses flew off her face and shattered on the marble floor. The jazz band stopped cold. 400 people went silent all at once, like someone had cut the power to the whole room. My name is Walter Harmon. I'm 75 years old. I built one of the largest private commercial real estate companies in Atlanta, starting from nothing with my own 2 hands. I was pouring concrete in the Georgia heat when most men my age were finishing college. Lorraine was right there beside me the whole way, packing my lunch when we couldn't afford a restaurant meal, sitting next to me in the boardroom when we signed our first $1 million deal. Nobody had ever raised a hand to her in 50 years of marriage. Not until that night. The woman who did it was Renata Ashford, 26 years old. She had just married my son Carlton 45 minutes earlier in front of everyone we knew. She stood over Lorraine with her arms crossed and said it loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Get out of here, old woman. Nobody wants you here. You are ruining my perfect day." Then she looked around at her guests like she was waiting for applause. Renata came from a Charleston family that called themselves Old Money. What they actually were was old debt dressed up in a nice address and a lot of attitude. She believed she was doing Carlton a favor by marrying him, that she was bringing real class into our family. She had done her research on us, or thought she had. She knew I started out as a blue-collar contractor. She figured I was a lucky retiree with a few modest investments and a son she could leverage. What she didn't know was that the venue she had picked for her wedding, the $5,000 a night luxury estate she had insisted on, because it was the most exclusive property in the state, was owned by a shell company registered entirely in my name. She had walked into my house to disrespect my wife. I looked over at Carlton. He was standing less than 3 feet away from the woman who had just hit his mother. I had carried that boy on my shoulders. I had worked triple shifts, so he'd never have to know what it felt like to go without. I gave him the best schools, the best connections, everything I never had, and I stood there waiting for him to do something, anything, step between them, grab her arm, say one word. He looked down at his shoes. His knuckles went white around his champagne glass. He never lifted his head. That was the moment, right there. 28 years of being his father burned down to ash in about 10 seconds. I didn't shout. I didn't go after anyone. Men who build things from the ground up don't throw tantrums in public. We calculate. I set my glasses down on a passing waiter's tray, walked over to Lorraine, and knelt down on my old knees. I picked up the pieces of her broken frames so nobody would step on them. I pressed my handkerchief to the cut on her cheek where the blood was running from Renata's engagement ring, the one I had paid for 6 months earlier. Lorraine looked at me, completely calm. After 50 years together, she already knew what I was thinking. She put her hand over mine and nodded once. That was enough. I stood up, looked Renata dead in the eye, and pulled out my phone. I dialed one number. My wealth manager picked up on the first ring. I said 3 words. Execute Directive 0. Renata let out a little laugh. She thought I was calling a cab. 10 seconds later, every door in the ballroom locked shut from the outside. The lights cut out completely. When the emergency lighting kicked back on, it wasn't the warm glow of the crystal chandeliers. It was harsh, industrial, the kind of light you see in a loading dock. The room looked completely different. So did the people in it. The venue manager, Reginald, walked out from the catering area holding a wireless microphone. He had worked for my management company for 10 years. He looked straight at me. I gave him a single nod, and he tapped the mic twice. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, no emotion at all in his voice. "Due to an immediate and total payment failure, all services for this event have been legally terminated. This property is now closed. You have 10 minutes to vacate the premises before local authorities arrive to process anyone remaining for criminal trespassing." The room went from silent to chaos in about 3 seconds. Women in diamonds shrieking, men in custom suits shouting at the staff, Renata standing in the middle of the dance floor with her jaw practically on the marble, spinning around trying to figure out what just happened. Carlton pulled out his phone, no signal. The venue ran signal jammers for high-security corporate events, and Directive 0 had activated every one of them. He was looking at his wallet, and I think somewhere in that moment he finally understood. Every card in there was connected to money I had built, and I had just shut all of it down. Lorraine and I didn't go home that night. I had my driver take us straight to Emory University Hospital. Not just to treat the cut on her face, I needed documentation. In Georgia, striking a 74-year-old woman isn't simple battery, it's elder abuse, it's a felony. A certified emergency room report with photographs and a doctor's signature is something no amount of old money can make disappear. The nurses took us straight into a private room when they saw the blood on Lorraine's face. A young doctor came in, cleaned the wound, and asked what happened. I didn't soften anything. I told him exactly what occurred, gave him Renata's full name, and described the circumstances clearly so he could write it all down in the official chart. A forensic nurse photographed the laceration from multiple angles. Every flash of that camera was another piece of evidence locked into the legal record before Renata's family even had a chance to call a lawyer. While the doctor was finishing the stitches, my phone rang. Carlton. He wasn't calling to ask if his mother was all right. He was at Hartsfield-Jackson Airport. He and Renata were trying to board their honeymoon flight to the Maldives, a trip I had paid for entirely, first-class tickets, private transfers, a villa for 3 weeks. The airline had canceled their reservation. The airport lounge had cut his membership card in half at the desk. He was screaming into the phone, calling it a glitch, demanding I call the airline immediately to fix it. I stepped out into the hallway and listened to him go for about 2 minutes. Then I told him there was no glitch. I had personally canceled the flights from the car on the way to the hospital. His corporate Amex was dead. His trust fund was frozen. Every account he had access to had been shut down. The moment he stood there and watched his mother bleed without saying one word, he stopped being part of this family. People who aren't part of my family don't spend my money. He told me I was being unreasonable. He called what happened to his mother a stupid argument. Then he threatened me, said he didn't need me, said they'd take a ride share back to his penthouse and figure everything out in the morning. I didn't tell him the penthouse was registered under my real estate portfolio. I didn't tell him the biometric codes had already been changed. I just ended the call and blocked his number. I walked back into the exam room and sat with Lorraine while the doctor finished. She looked at me and I nodded once. She understood. The cord had been cut. By 2 a.m, Renata had posted a video online. She and Carlton had been locked out of the penthouse exactly like I knew they would be, and they were stuck in a rundown motel off the interstate. She was sitting on the edge of the bed with her mascara smudged just right, voice perfectly shaky, telling her followers that Lorraine had attacked her. She used every piece of coded language designed to make my wife sound like the aggressor. Said our family was hostile, said she had acted in pure self-defense, said the entire night had been a violent nightmare orchestrated against her. Within an hour, the video had millions of views. The comment section was vicious. Strangers calling Lorraine names I won't repeat here, calling for charges to be filed against an elderly woman who had done nothing wrong. Then I saw Carlton's comment. Pinned at the top, verified account, public, for everyone to see, he wrote that he stood by his wife, that no one should have to endure what she suffered on her wedding day. I sat in my study and read those words for a long time. What those millions of people watching that video didn't know was what Lorraine had actually seen 1 hour before the reception started. She had gone up to the bridal suite to deliver a family heirloom, a diamond necklace that had been in our family for decades, meant as a welcome gift to show Renata that whatever our differences, she was now part of something real. When Lorraine quietly opened the suite door, she didn't find a nervous bride getting ready. She found Renata at the vanity mirror with 3 of her bridesmaids, a rolled-up $100 bill in her hand, cocaine spread across the glass surface. Renata was laughing, telling her friends about the prenuptial agreement our lawyers had made her sign. She said she'd hired her own attorney who found a loophole in the trust fund stipulations. Said she only had to stay married to Carlton for 12 months, then she could trigger a divorce clause worth $25 million. She called my son a stupid meal ticket. She called our family gullible fools, desperate for approval. Lorraine walked in, set the jewelry box on the table, and waited for Renata to notice her standing there. When Renata dropped the bill and froze, Lorraine looked her in the eye and told her to wash her face, pack her bags, and leave through the back quietly. Said we would handle the cancellation with dignity and keep her drug use completely private. Renata was high and felt untouchable. She walked downstairs and forced the wedding to proceed. When Lorraine approached her later on the dance floor to quietly insist she stop, Renata panicked. She knew her $25 million payday was about to evaporate, so she struck first, created chaos, and planned to spin the whole thing exactly as she was doing now on social media. She thought the viral video would pressure us into paying to make the scandal go away. She thought we were soft people who would write a check rather than fight. She had no idea what was coming. The next morning, Nathaniel Caldwell showed up at my office with a stack of papers. Renata and her father, Gerald Ashford, had filed a $10 million lawsuit overnight. Emotional distress, false imprisonment from the locked doors. They were demanding a settlement, and their letter made it clear that if I didn't pay, the viral video would be just the opening move in a full media campaign targeting my business reputation. I read through the papers slowly. Then I set them down and smiled. They had just handed me exactly the legal opening I needed. We met the following morning in Nathaniel's office on the 50th floor of a building I owned through a subsidiary. Carlton and Renata walked in 15 minutes late. A cheap power move. They brought a litigator in a loud pinstriped suit who smelled like too much cologne and walked like he'd already won. Renata looked like she had come to collect a prize. She sat down across from me, crossed her legs, and told my lawyer she was willing to make the whole situation go away if we simply agreed to release Carlton's inheritance. She wanted $10 million taken out as a personal settlement for her suffering. The remaining $40 million would go into a joint account for her and Carlton to start their new life. She actually used the word suffering. Nathaniel didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He just slid a single folder across the table and told them to read page 1 carefully. Carlton had never owned that money, not $1 of it. The trust was established as a fully discretionary generation-skipping trust, meaning Lorraine and I held complete control as sole trustees. Carlton was a discretionary beneficiary. He could receive what we chose to give him when we chose to give it. He had no legal right to demand a payout, borrow against the principal, or transfer anything to a spouse. The law on this was absolute. I watched the color leave Carlton's face. He had spent years telling people he had a $50 million trust fund. He had built his whole identity around it, drove cars he couldn't afford, lived in a penthouse he didn't own, moved through Atlanta high society pretending to be an heir, and now he was sitting in a boardroom finding out it had never been his to control. Renata's attorney tried to pivot: community property laws, marital rights. She dragged it through family court for years. Nathaniel just flipped the folder to page 47 and put his pen on a specific paragraph highlighted in black. Section 8. The morality clause. Any physical harm inflicted on the grantors, meaning me and Lorraine, by a beneficiary or their legally wedded spouse, triggered automatic and permanent disinheritance. No board vote needed. No arbitration required. No grace period. The clause activated the instant Renata's hand connected with Lorraine's face in front of 400 witnesses. Carlton's access to the trust was gone before the ambulance could have arrived. The litigator stopped talking. He looked at the clause, looked at Nathaniel, then quietly closed his briefcase and pushed his chair back from the table. He had taken this case expecting an easy payday from a family trying to avoid bad press. Instead, he was looking at an airtight legal wall backed by a hospital report and a room full of people who saw everything. He stood up, nodded at no one in particular, and walked out. Renata turned to Carlton, and the mask came off. She had been playing the composed, wronged wife all morning. That version of her disappeared the second the attorney left. She leaned toward Carlton, and her voice dropped into something colder. She wanted to know why he hadn't told her the trust was discretionary. He tried to explain that he genuinely believed the money would eventually come to him. She didn't want to hear it. She stood up, grabbed her bag, and walked out without another word. Carlton sat there alone at the table for almost a full minute. He looked at me for the first time all morning, his mouth open, but nothing came out. I didn't give him anything. No anger, no satisfaction. I just looked at him the way you look at a stranger on the street. Then I gathered my papers and left. What Carlton didn't know yet, and what Renata certainly didn't know, was that I had been planning the second part of this for 3 months before the wedding even happened. When Carlton first brought Renata home and announced the engagement, something felt wrong immediately. Not the kind of wrong you can explain at dinner. The kind you feel in your gut after 40 years of doing deals with people who smile at you while they're counting your money. I hired the most thorough private investigator in Georgia and paid him to go deep. He came back a week later with more than I expected. Gerald Ashford's logistics and trucking company had been quietly bleeding cash for 5 years. He ran his operations on outdated systems and refused to modernize. To keep up the appearance of wealth, the country club memberships, the Charleston estate, the European vacations, he had taken out $15 million in high-interest short-term corporate loans from several regional banks. He was standing on a trapdoor. All it needed was someone to pull the lever. Over 3 quiet weeks, through a proxy hedge fund registered in Delaware with zero public connection to my name, I approached those banks. They were desperate to clear the bad debt off their books before Gerald's company officially collapsed. They sold me every loan for pennies on the dollar, without ever knowing who the real buyer was. By the time Renata walked down the aisle, I already owned her father's entire financial future. After the boardroom meeting, I issued a formal margin call through the Delaware Fund. Gerald had 48 hours to wire $15 million to my holding account, or I would execute a full hostile takeover of everything he owned. He showed up at my office 12 hours later. The man who had stood in his country club and called my son a street rat was now in my building, in my waiting room, sitting with a cardboard coffee cup and shaking hands. My assistant made him wait 20 minutes in the hallway before opening the door. I wanted the silence and the marble walls and the view of Atlanta from the 40th floor to do their work on him before he ever sat down. When he finally walked in, I didn't offer him a seat or a glass of water. I just stood behind my desk and waited. He tried to start with dignity. Addressed me by my first name like we were equals. Said there had been a terrible misunderstanding between our families. Blamed the stress of the wedding for the things he had said and done. He placed his hands flat on my desk and asked me to be reasonable. talked about his employees, hundreds of them who depended on the company, talked about the Charleston estate, 4 generations in his family, what it would do to Miriam if they lost it. He asked for 6 months to restructure and promised to pay every cent back with full interest. I let him finish. Then I told him what I wanted, not his company. Not a seat on his board, not money. I wanted Renata on camera within 24 hours, posting to every platform she had used to spread lies about my wife. In that video, she would tell the truth. The cocaine in the bridal suite. The plan to divorce Carlton after 12 months and take $25 million. The fact that she was the one who struck Lorraine unprovoked in front of 400 people. Full confession, nothing softened. And after the video, she would sign an annulment. Complete waiver of all marital rights. No alimony, no division of assets, no claim of any kind. She would leave the marriage with exactly what she brought into it. Do that, and I would restructure his $15 million debt into a manageable 10-year payment plan. He keeps the company, he keeps the mansion. Gerald didn't argue. He didn't try to negotiate a single word. He picked up the annulment papers with both hands and walked out of my office faster than he walked in. While Gerald was on his way to deliver that ultimatum to his daughter, Renata had already made her next move. She walked into a police precinct and filed a sworn statement claiming I had sent armed men to threaten her at the motel. She figured if she could get me arrested, I would settle immediately to avoid a criminal case. 2 plainclothes detectives showed up at my gate that evening. I invited them in, offered coffee, sat them down in my study, and showed them everything. The footage was from military-grade 4K cameras installed across every property I own. The bridal suite feed was perfectly clear. You could hear every word Renata said to her bridesmaids. You could see the cocaine on the mirror, the rolled-up bill in her hand, hear her laughing about the fraud, hear her call Carlton a meal ticket. Then the ballroom feed showed Lorraine walking calmly toward the dance floor, and Renata crossing the room with clear intent, and the strike itself captured from 4 angles simultaneously. And then just seconds after it happened, the enhanced audio picked up Renata, leaning toward her mother Miriam and whispering that she was going to tell the police Lorraine attacked her first so they could sue for millions. The older detective set down his coffee cup and asked if he could take the USB drive as state evidence. I told him to keep it. 20 minutes after they left my study, a district court judge had signed an emergency arrest warrant. They found Renata at the Piedmont Elite Country Club, sitting at a shaded table on the outdoor terrace during the lunch rush, surrounded by her friends. She was in full performance mode, dabbing her eyes, telling the story of her ruined wedding to a captive audience of people who believed every word. She had a mimosa in her hand and the look of someone who thought she was completely untouchable. She saw the detectives come through the mahogany doors and actually smiled. She stood up, smoothed her dress, and extended her hand toward them, assuming they had come to tell her I was in custody. The older detective didn't take her hand. He asked her to confirm her full name. When she did, he unclipped the handcuffs from his belt. The sound of that metal in the quiet of the terrace made every conversation stop. He read the charges out loud, one at a time, in a voice that carried across every table on the terrace. Felony elder abuse, filing a false police report, perjury, possession of a Schedule I narcotic. Renata started shaking her head before he finished the first charge. By the third one, she was grabbing the edge of the table. By the fourth, she was screaming. Not the delicate tears she had used in her social media video. This was something raw and ugly and completely out of control. Her friends pushed their chairs back. Nobody reached for her. Nobody said a word. The detectives pulled her arms behind her back, locked the cuffs, and walked her straight through the center of that terrace in front of every person she had been performing for. Her heels scraped against the stone. Her hair came loose. The expensive dress she had worn to project invincibility was twisted and wrinkled by the time they got her through the front doors. Carlton was standing in the parking lot. He had come to beg her to take him back. He watched them push her into the back of an unmarked cruiser and drive away. He stood there alone on the asphalt holding her designer purse, which one of her friends had shoved into his chest without a word on the way out. The phone inside the purse was unlocked, and the messages on the screen were from a man named Broderick Langley. Carlton scrolled through those messages standing in a parking lot in the Atlanta heat, alone, holding his ex-wife's purse like a man who had just woken up from a long sleep and didn't recognize where he was. Broderick Langley was one of the groomsmen from the wedding. Renata had always called him a close childhood friend. The messages told a different story. They had planned the entire marriage together. Broderick had connected her with a lawyer who specialized in exploiting trust fund structures. Renata had laid out the whole scheme in detail across dozens of texts. 6 months in, trigger the divorce clause, walk away with $25 million, buy a villa in the south of France. She had sent Broderick a photo of herself in her wedding dress with a caption that said she was putting on her work uniform to go rob the bank. She had never loved Carlton. Not for a single day. She could barely stand to be around him. She said so plainly in her own words in message after message going back months before the engagement. Carlton stood in that parking lot and read every one of them. I know what happened next because his old college friend was with him. A man named Marcus, someone Carlton had completely cut off because Renata decided he wasn't the right kind of person for their social circle. Carlton had swallowed that too, along with everything else, trying to fit into a world that was never going to accept him no matter how much of my money he spent. Marcus drove him around for a while. At some point, Carlton asked to be taken to our gate in Buckhead. It was raining hard by then, the kind of storm that comes in fast off the Georgia hills and shakes the windows. I was in my study when the motion sensor triggered on the front gate monitor. I watched Carlton get out of a beat-up Honda in the pouring rain, walk up to the iron bars and grab hold of them with both hands. He looked up at the camera. He knew I was watching. He talked for a while, told me he had seen the messages, told me he finally understood what Renata had been from the beginning, said he was sorry for what happened in the ballroom, that he had frozen, that he didn't know what to do. He dropped to his knees on the wet asphalt and asked me to open the gate. Lorraine came into the study quietly while he was still talking. She stood behind my chair and looked at the screen. She didn't ask me to press the button. She put her hands on my shoulders and stood there with me. I pressed the intercom. I told him that an apology that only comes after losing everything is not really an apology. I told him that figuring out Renata was a fraud only after she got arrested didn't make him a victim. It just meant he had been a willing fool. I told him that a man who watches his mother bleed and says nothing is no son of mine. Then I said, "Walk away." I cut the feed. Lorraine leaned down and put her hand over mine without saying a word. We sat there together in the quiet while the rain came down outside. The 48-hour deadline on Gerald's margin call expired the next morning with nothing transferred. I authorized Nathaniel to begin the takeover immediately. By noon, Gerald's company was under new ownership. By late afternoon, the sheriff had served eviction papers at the Charleston estate. Gerald and Miriam were photographed loading trash bags into a rental car and driving out of the state before federal investigators arrived with warrants. The forensic accountants I had sent into Gerald's company during the takeover had found 5 years of tax evasion and offshore accounts. I handed all of it to the federal authorities the same day. The Charleston estate was transferred to a nonprofit before sunset. Today, it houses a community center for at-risk youth in the city. The grand ballroom where Gerald used to host his country club crowd is a computer lab for teenagers. The garden is a greenhouse. His family's name has been removed from the property permanently. 3 months later, the trial lasted 2 days. The jury came back in under 2 hours, guilty on all 4 counts. The judge sentenced Renata to 3 years in state prison without the possibility of early parole. When the bailiffs put the cuffs on her, she screamed for Gerald to come save her. The benches behind the defense table were completely empty. He was already gone. Lorraine and I walked out of that courthouse and went home. 6 months have passed. We sit on the porch most afternoons now. The magnolias are in bloom. The estate is quiet in a way that only comes after something has been resolved completely. We rewrote our entire legacy. Every asset goes into a charitable blind trust when we're gone. Full scholarships for underprivileged black students across Georgia. 0-interest startup loans for minority entrepreneurs building something from nothing. The same way Lorraine and I once did. Our money will build futures instead of funding entitlement. Last week, a delivery truck came up the drive and stopped at the gate. Carlton stepped out in a faded work uniform and steel-toed boots worn down from real use. He carried a package to the stone pillar, set it down, looked up at the camera, and gave one slow nod. No begging, no performance. Then he walked back to the truck and drove away to finish his route. I didn't open the gate, but I didn't look away either. I watched until the truck was gone. Stripping away everything I had given him was the hardest decision I ever made as a father. I still believe it was the only honest thing left I could do for him. He's out there now learning what $1 actually costs. Learning what it means to earn something instead of inherit it. That's not punishment. That's the only education that was ever going to stick. If you've been sitting on disrespect inside your own family, waiting for the right moment to say something or do something, I want you to hear this clearly. You're not obligated to keep funding the people who treat you like a resource. Blood is biology. Loyalty is a choice. And peace built on your own silence is just a slow drain on everything you work to build. Respect has to mean something. If it doesn't cost anyone anything to take it from you, they will keep taking it. If this story hit close to home, share it with someone who needed to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. And if you believe that dignity is worth protecting no matter who's asking you to give it up, hit that subscribe button. There are more stories coming, and every one of them is about people who decided they were done being quiet.